Okay, let's get started. You're talking college football. We're going to give you answers about college football. Fire away.
Okay, this is from Greg, and he says, Lee, what is your gut feeling about where Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, and Washington State land?
This is all a money deal, and the Atlantic Coast Conference has a different deal now via ESPN that would give them an additional $55 million of TV revenue if they brought in Stanford, Cal, and SMU. Stanford and Cal would take a discount from the normal TV rights if they join the ACC. SMU is not going to share any money for the first 5 years. They would take the $55 million extra and spread it to the other ACC teams based on if you got to a bowl game, if you got to a national championship game, you get some bonus money. That's where it is right now. I think it makes no sense at all to have Stanford go play Wake Forest or Cal play NC State. It's just a really bad fit. Closer to home, if Cal and Stanford vacate, Oregon State, Washington State would be a great addition to the Mountain West. It'd make this a really good college football conference because we got good schools here already, and now you're adding the Beavers, you're adding Washington State. But that being said, that means that Oregon State, Washington State emotionally have to accept the fact they're stepping down from the PAC to the Mountain West. They're going to take a significant decrease in TV money. And can they do that? Because they've got 18 other college programs they still have to fund, and they won't be getting anywhere near the TV contract. Greg, it's a great question. It's a sad question to have to discuss. If Cal and Stanford could stay linked to Oregon State and Washington State, and if they could convince 4 of the Mountain West teams to buy their way out and then join them, then you'd have some form of a PAC-8 or a PAC-10. But I don't ever think we'll see a conference on the West Coast like we had since 1915 that was ruined.
Well, yeah, it's weird thinking of Stanford and Cal playing in the ACC. That's bizarre. But it seems to me that, these 4 remaining schools, they have one thing that a lot of other people don't have, and they're a Power 5 conference. So you would think that they would have the opportunity to rebuild the Pac-12.
With who, though? Where are you going to get them?
But even if you went and cherry pick some of the best of the group of 5, wherever they are across America, you got something, and at least that way they don't need to kind of go to the ACC with their tail between their legs. They could be in a position of strength.
I'd like to see that, but I don't think that's going to happen because I think Cal and Stanford just need to be linked somewhere to get the TV money because they need that money for their athletic programs, which is terrible then to the people in Pullman, Washington, and in Corvallis, Oregon. Okay, we carry on. Next question.
Okay, next question. This is from TR, and he says, your Bobcats had a rough day versus the Aztecs at Snapdragon last Saturday.
Well, I told Brady Hoke because he came up to me first thing at the press conference. We're standing off to the side, and he said, what'd you think? I said, hey, you got the quarterback Curtis Rourke before Curtis Rourke got you. Curtis Rourke was going to throw for 400 yards against San Diego State. I mean, he almost had 100 before he got hurt. And I felt bad because I thought the kid got hit on a late hit with a helmet. That's football. They didn't call it, and he's out. He was 8 for 10 with 2 drops, almost had 100 yards in the first quarter alone. But Bobcats, they got a whole season to play ahead of them. If Rourke comes back with no after effects, whether it's concussion or a leg, then I think Ohio's going to be good. I think San Diego State took a massive step forward in the second half of that game, and now they can build on this against that. That'll be a walkover against Idaho State. So that'll give them 2 full weeks to get everything in place because then they're going to play real people, starting with UCLA, and they got Boise coming in soon after that. So Aztecs go 2-0, and then we'll play UCLA and see where they are and see their kid quarterback against the Aztec defense, which just has to continue to ratchet it up and get better and better.
Well, your Ohio Bobcats are projected to be a 10-win team, right? Yep. So that was a big win for the Aztecs. And so that's got to give them a lot of confidence. Like you said, we'll find out when we get to week 3, but hopefully they're not looking ahead. Because can you imagine if they lost to Idaho State?
Idaho State doesn't have enough players at 2-20 the last 2 years.
Yeah. So hopefully this is going to be a chance for them to kind of get healthy and get primed up. But I'm going this Saturday. I'm hoping there's going to be a lot of people there. It's a night game, so I think that'll be a little bit easier.
We carry on with the conversation. This place is called Fans Forum. Whatever you got to say.
All right. So here's a comment here from Beto. He says, "Do you think Notre Dame has a chance this year?"
Huge question. I mean, Notre Dame stomped Navy over in Dublin, Ireland last week, but I don't put any credence in that because Navy is in the middle of a new coaching staff with a massive rebuild and such disparity in the talent level between the Irish and the midshipmen. I was really stunned. Tyler Buckner left South Bend to go to Alabama, but people talk, players walk, money speaks, and that's probably got something to do with it. Notre Dame has just not been what Notre Dame used to be way back in the day. I mean, the Lou Holtz era is a long time ago, but it's still a really, really special place. You talk about venues. I mean, first time I broadcast from South Bend, I stood up in the press box. It was on a Saturday. USC played late afternoon, late fall, and the sun was setting. John, I swear to you, I stood there on the press row, and I looked to the left down the back, the outer end of the stadium, and there's that academic building with the mosaic, touchdown Jesus.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Holy cow. I looked at that and I just said, yeah, that mystique is real.
Yeah.
And, the players, they come out of the tunnel, and when they look up, what's the first thing they see? Touchdown Jesus.
Yeah.
So great venue. And it's a great program historically. I mean, going back to the 1920s and 1930s.
Oh, yeah.
You walk around that campus, you walk around that stadium. If that stadium could talk, could it tell you some stories?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I toured there during the off season one time, and it was really neat. Just kind of a weird tangent, but did you like the movie Rudy?
It was okay. I thought a little cornball in it, but I had a very good working relationship with Dan Devine.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Nice.
Dan, after he retired from Notre Dame, he came to Arizona State, and actually he was part of our broadcast team, and he'd do some historical perspective stuff.
Cool.
He's just a fascinating, nice man to listen to. He obviously did some really cool things at Notre Dame. Okay, let's move on. Fans Forum continues.
Moving on. Let's go here to John, and he says, "I moved to South Carolina last year. Just found the saw after all this time."
Well, South Carolina Clemson's pretty doggone good. Now, South Carolina's Gamecocks have not been what the Clemson Tigers have been. That's a pretty fierce rivalry. It'd be neat to see South Carolina be able to, quote, get back to where they used to be. Of course, Clemson, I don't think Clemson's the same program now, but, you talk about history and legacy, and Clemson got really good, and Clemson beat the daylights out of South Carolina. But South Carolina historically has had the ability to come back. I don't think they get the same level of recruits. I think South Carolina has to, quote, coach them up. But that's pretty doggone good rivalry. And what makes college football? Rivalries.
Rivalries, yeah. So yeah, friends of ours, their daughter went to Clemson, and they went back there with her, and they went to the football games, and they were talking about what an amazing event it is.
Oh,
and they come running down a hill before they go into the
touch
stadium.
the rock.
Yeah, so it's just all of that stuff, the ceremonial things, the historical things make college football so much different than the NFL. But, speaking here about John, he's in South Carolina rediscovering you. You wouldn't believe the amount of people on social media that have rediscovered you because of this podcast, and they're thrilled.
Podcast, Instagram, we are everywhere. You can't believe, people, the numbers of people that are subscribing to what we're doing on this podcast, the number of, quote, views. We do the 50-second commentary that we post on Instagram. We got 40,000 views in 2 days. It's just absolutely stunning.
Stunning. Yeah, it's unbelievable. So, people love you, Hacksaw.
On we go.
On we go. This is a different John. He says, "For all the folks changing conferences, be careful what you ask for. What has Nebraska won since they left the Big 12? Or Texas A&M? What have Rutgers and Maryland won in the Big 10?
Well, I concur. And, it's interesting, John. There's a side story here because we've talked about this a couple weeks ago. I believe what I've been told by other college people, that when these 5-year contracts, the mega TV contracts that are out there right now, when these contracts expire, the networks are going to come back to the universities and the conferences and saying, we're not paying you $50 million so you can give it to Rutgers or to Vanderbilt, etc. We want you to form a super conference, and we'll pour our money into a 20 or 25 team super conference. And then we'll give you some other money you can distribute to your non-winning programs. I think we call it a Champions League. I think this is eventually, I bet 5 years from now, if John is still talking to me, we may have another rebuilding, restructuring of college football in which the elite football programs are in their own conference and they're going to get all the paydays. Because I just don't think that these conferences want to pay $50 million a year to Oregon State and Washington State, and the bottom feeders, all these other conferences around the league.
Well, imagine if they did that. I mean, we were just talking about how I'm tired of seeing Alabama and Ohio State, and and if they went to that super conference, those guys would get more money and they'd have more control, and all the have-nots would be further down the list. So I don't know, but this is an interesting question. I mean, like Texas A&M as an example, they had a nice little run there in the SEC with Johnny Manziel.
They did, but it has not continued.
Right.
And, these guys that have jumped conferences, Nebraska, Big Ten.
Yeah.
Why? What have they accomplished? Last I heard, they kept firing coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's the exact same thing. There's some people out there in these other conferences just make no bloody sense. Boston College, Atlantic Coast Conference. Yeah, really? BC equal to North Carolina in basketball? Is BC equal to anybody in football in the ACC? I mean,
it depends if Doug Flutie's playing.
Yeah, it's just absurd. Okay, move on.
Okay, here's another one from TR, and he says, need at least a 16-game playoff, team playoff, to give all 130 or so teams a shot at the beginning of the season. What do you think?
Yeah, but the problem is now we're discussing 12, and now you're texting us, emailing us from left field. You want 16. Does that not mean you're going to have a bunch of 50 to 7 games in the playoffs? Is that really good for college football? Again, as John has alluded to, and rightfully so, the haves are up here. There's an awful lot of have-nots down here. And now you're going to say, well, gee, we'll take 16 teams. Well, that means you may have some have-nots that qualify to get in, and then they get beat 63-7. Is that really good for college football? It's very different from March Madness and the ability of a little guy to beat a big guy.
But that gives the little guy the opportunity to become a have. Because if they're constantly a have-not and they never get a chance, they're never invited to the dance, in this case, a 16-team playoff, then they're doomed. They have no chance. But if you get like TCU had a nice run there, they got to the national championship, then people start paying attention and recruits want to go there. So I think it's a great thing. And then plus you give Boise State, who frankly has been so deserving to be in the playoffs for a while and never got in. Now you're going to let them get in and they beat Oklahoma. Remember that about 15 years ago. Imagine if they got in and there were some more of those upsets.
Okay, if you're expanding the playoffs, I think we'd be arguing about this over a beer going forward. Let's carry on with a couple more in Fans Forum.
Okay, this is kind of conference related, but not necessarily football. What's going to happen with San Diego State men's soccer in the Pac-12?
That's a huge question, but they can play. They can play a bunch of those guys as, quote, non-conference. Now, nobody's talked about what happens to the Olympic sports as part of SC and UCLA going that way to the Big Ten. Those schools are taking those Olympic sports that way. I don't understand what anybody thinks there's any value for UCLA and USC's soccer team to have to go play at Michigan State. But I think the Aztecs will be able to scattergun schedules so they can play these games and they would, quote, be independents. And they'll continue to play whatever is left here in Southern California and in the region. It's, soccer's different. Not everybody in the, quote, Mountain West plays soccer. Weather's got elements have got a lot to do with that. So I think there will be enough games. Will there be a conference to accede to try to grab hold of? That becomes a big question. But the Washingtons of the world and, San Diego State, Washington have a pretty good soccer rivalry. I've been up there to that Aztec deck to watch soccer. That's kind of a cool experience. The Washingtons of the world who are relocating to other conferences, they're going to need a place to have some of their teams play, quote, non-conference games. So I think the Aztec scheduling probably will be okay.
This is one of those factoids that kind of catches you by surprise when you find out that San Diego State soccer is actually in the Pac-12. And it's ironic since San Diego State's been wanting to be in the Pac-12 forever, and at least soccer made it. Let's got some more comments here. Here's one from Greg, and he says, Is there a chance these new conferences just do this for football and go back to regular conferences for all their sports? Might be a good compromise.
Well, possibly. I also spin back to what John and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, that when these set of TV contracts expire, you may see the networks play a different brand of hardball against these conferences, which would then say, okay, conference schools, you just go back to who you used to be, you play regional rivals, etc., and you go from there. Um, it's an awful tough call. Nobody knows. We're just kind of spitballing here ideas. I just don't like any aspect of what USC, UCLA did than what Oregon, Washington did. I might be old school. Yes, I got gray hair. So does he. I mean, the reality is conferences' success has been built on rivalries over generations, and they turned their back on the legacy and the history of what the conference was for a massive payday so they could go play freaking games in Iowa City and Iowa State. I just don't like the concept of what they did.
Well, I like this compromise idea because this whole thing is about football. I mean, all the money, all the TV contracts, it's all football. I mean, there's really no financial benefit for Cal's track and field team to go play Wake Forest. I mean, it's all the football money. So maybe they just need to peel off football separately and then let everyone else kind of go back to normal.
As we said, Champions League, maybe 5 years down the road. Okay, let's do a couple more here.
Okay, let's get some social media comments in here. And let's go to this one here. And I think this is a good talking about Pac-12. This is from Loveland Kirk on Instagram. Bad for players, bad for students. They're talking about the merger potentially of the Pac-4 and the Mountain West. We talked about that weeks ago. Bad for players, bad for students, bad for fans, bad for alumni. What a shame. It's been downhill for the Pac-10 or Pac-12 ever since the Rose Bowl dropped being a Pac-10-12 Big Ten championship.
Well, that's because TV changed everything. First, it was a 2-team playoff. Then it was expanded to 4. And now the sucker's going to 12. And we got guys from left field. They're sending us messages. Let's make it 16. So all the dynamics of the conference relationships and affiliations all changed. Now, the Rose Bowl is going to be part of the college football playoff. The Rose Bowl, as we used to know it, USC versus Ohio State, it's just not going to be the same thing going forward. In terms of if somebody drops down out of the Pac-2, if Washington State, Oregon State come here to this conference, it's going to be great for the conference because those are really good athletic programs and very good football programs, and they'll add more oomph to the conference. But by the same token, it's tough if you're in Corvallis or Pullman and you're the president of the university to have to make that decision, because then you're walking away from whatever was left in the history and legacy, and you're taking a massive cut in TV money, and you need that TV money. Because in about half these schools, the TV money is their lifeline to be able to fund Oregon State baseball and everything else that goes with it.
Yeah. Well, I just remember as a kid, it was always the Big Ten and the Pac-12 or Pac-10 at the time when they had the Rose Bowl. And I always thought it was kind of odd that the USC UCLA for them was like a home game, but I was just escaped what I was about to. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So sometimes, remember back in history before we had the BCS playoff, and these bowls were the conferences the way they were aligned, but then you'd end up with a situation where there'd be 2 undefeated teams and there was no chance for them to play each other. To me, that was so frustrating as a fan. I mean, didn't USC win a national champion or co-championship one year?
Yeah, and it was also the huge argument about the ratings, the rankings.
Mm-hmm.
How could we be 12-0 and not be number one?
Exactly.
That was a great, massive debate about the polls and who voted in the polls. And did you watch us before you voted in the polls? And it just went. This thing never, ever was solidified to the point of this is the best way to do it, because it was constantly in a change and state of flux.
Moving on. Okay. Reggie Bush. We got to talk more about him. People are loving this comment. This is from John. He says, so what do you say about the 200 violations at Tennessee and no bowl bans, 90 plus violations at Alabama, no bowl bans or any sanctions, both slaps on the wrist, and then Penn State and Sandusky and 30 plus years of sexual abuse, they get nothing. What about Miami buying prostitutes and having keggers for underage recruits? No bowl bans and loss of scholarships. NCAA is corrupt and unfair. Reinstate Reggie.
Big question to me, and I said this last week. If Reggie was innocent, why did not Reggie not cooperate with the NCAA probe? He could have professed his innocence a decade ago, and if the NCAA cracked on him, so be it. Instead, he stayed silent. He returned the trophy, did not say anything, had a really nice NFL career, became a TV analyst, and now all of a sudden he feels slighted and wants to be taken care of for what happened way back when. He should have cooperated, and he could have professed his innocence in front of everybody and stood face to face with the NCAA and said, no, I did not do this. But the NCAA also had all this documentation that he did do it, and he did get these benefits, and the family surely got these benefits. So because he's homegrown, I can't stand on his street corner and say this guy got screwed, because I think this guy took some things, and I know his family took a bunch of things. He should have said that. On the flip side is he could have always stood up if he did do it, and he could have apologized to his alma mater, and he could have apologized to the NCAA. But he didn't do any of that. Now he wants to be, quote, taken care of decades after the fact. So I just have a problem. In terms of the NCAA, depending on what decade you're in, their ability to police sports has been off the charts. Sometimes it's here horrible. Sometimes it's here heavy-handed. You just talked about Tennessee. Tennessee will never be a national power for the next 5 to 10 years. They didn't get a bowl ban, but they took so many scholarships and recruiting visits away. I mean, they tagged Tennessee like they tagged USC. They're just going to be non-competitive. Now, I can't go back 25 years and cite you song and verse about Texas A&M, and all the junk that went on with the big cigars and the boosters and all that. That was a different era. A tough job of police because the NCAA directory is yay thick. The rules are so complicated, etc. So I don't have an answer to any of this. But because of all the problems, the death penalty to SMU and things of that nature, we've now put the academic performance rating plan into place where these guys have to go to class on a track to graduate and must get grades. And a lot of them are still doing it. So it was really tacky in the past. As I said, the letters SEC, Southeastern Conference, really stood for, sure, everyone cheats. And back in the day, Texas A&M, and all those guys, SWC, someone will cheat.
Those are good ones. I'll tell you what, though, in social media, it's overwhelming the amount of people that support Reggie Bush on this.
Hometown boy, though, right?
Well, yeah, but it's all, well, they're probably USC fans too, but there are a lot of people that claim he's innocent. He didn't agree to these agents, but you said he signed the contract, right? I mean, so I don't know what to think about this, but the fans are definitely on Reggie's side.
Okay. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. That's why we're doing this podcast. Let's do one more here before we put a lid on our Thursday show.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the Aztecs and trying to fill up that stadium, because there's been a lot of comments online about what's the reason. And this is from the Green Dragon. And he says, pricing could be an issue. I am both a Nevada and San Diego State fan. I've seen a disconnect between the economic hardship and what college sports view as their worth. Families won't come if it makes more sense to watch the game on TV, and without people in the stands, you lose the future fan base.
Well, I concur with you. When I was the voice of the Aztecs, that was in the Marshall Faulk era, and they were drawing 45 to 50,000 per game. That 3-year run was phenomenal. I thought San Diego State had arrived as a football program, and then instead Al Luganbill got fired, and the thing kind of went off track, and they never regained their momentum. I thought Snapdragon Stadium would make a big difference, and I think the San Diego State Athletic Department and whoever guided them made a horrific mistake in the pricing, because to me it looked like it was a money gouge. Price of tickets, price to park, concessions, and you have to make donations to, quote, be a member of one of the clubs. It was absurd. And then you add in the fact, oh, by the way, they're in the Mountain West Conference, and I can't get hyped about Wyoming, who's coming in here to play. and then you put a rugged football season and all that controversy, and you throw in COVID, they lost all their momentum going in, and then they overpriced the thing. And I think the thing that really bothers me is they have lost the fans in this community. These people are not coming back because now you got the disappointment of you didn't get into the Pac-10 conference or the Pac-12, and we're here in the Mountain West, and there's a stigma about being friends with Wyoming and Colorado State and the Air Force Academy. So they're in a place that's not a good place in terms of being big time, and they're charging absurd prices. And I think that's been a big lashback, and I don't know how they rebuild that.
Well, that's been the primary objection in social media is the price. But think about like if you're JD Wicker and it's 2017 and you've had this vision for this stadium, and back then, the economy, this is before COVID, so the economy wasn't blown up, and things were generally pretty good in the economy. And then the basketball team was good. The Aztec football team was in the bowls every year. Their offense was really a lot more exciting then. And they're probably thinking, well, yeah, this is our time to cash in. And then, oh, by the way, we'll be able to use a lot of these funds to reinvest into the program, build new facilities. San Diego State's going to rise to a new level. They probably had this utopian vision of what was going to happen, and then everything went to hell. I mean, there was COVID. They're 2 years in LA. The offense regressed a bit. So now suddenly it's a different reality. And yeah, so like I'm going to go to the game this Saturday, but it's a night game. I think it starts at 7. So I think the heat and shade problem is not going to be an objection. But I'm going to see what this experience is like. I'm looking forward to it.
I hope so. I mean, I've said those are honorable leaders they have in Wicker and Brady Hoke. They have a history of really good coaches. They got good kids. And that's the coolest thing because I'm down there all the time. They're just really neat young men who are playing, but also going to class and making things happen. But the lashback in the community, John, there were almost 10,000 unsold tickets for the opening home game. There are 11,000 unsold tickets for Idaho State, and they're playing UCLA in week 3, and there's 8,000 unsold tickets still because the prices are boom.
Well, on StubHub, on the resale market, they're insane.
Yeah. Now, maybe that'll change. Mm-hmm. Maybe 1 o'clock Saturday afternoon on StubHub or the other resale venues, you might get a ticket for $17.
Okay.
The prices are going to come way down, but the prices they're asking are just so through the roof, especially for the marquee games. Now, the same thing's happening in basketball because they do charge a significant chunk for, quote, the elite games, mm-hmm. and there's that club fee. You got to pay for that. So maybe we were too small market for so long we never understood what was happening around us in college football, or maybe they were too arrogant to just try to hit these people with these ticket prices and surcharges and club memberships to buy the ticket. I just think they made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how they're going to get the community back. That's the big thing.
Well, the way to get the community back is just win, baby. That's what it has to be. If they keep winning, they're going to be fine.
Hey, listen, we hope you've enjoyed our Thursday podcast.